It's so encouraging to be together on Resurrection Sunday. If you have a Bible, please turn with me to the book of Matthew. We will begin in chapter 27. Obviously, it's amazing and it's encouraging to be together on this amazing day. This is Resurrection Sunday. This is the day being celebrated all over the world because it is a flashpoint and the central, most significant event in all of human history. If you look at the calendars that we use today, all of our Greco-Roman calendars, whether you subscribe to the Julian calendar or the Gregorian calendar, all the dates of which we're living in are all noted with AD, Anno Domini, which means after the death of Jesus. And so our existence is pegged to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So think about it. This event that we're celebrating today was so central to our existence that right now, every date that you write down, any significant anniversary in your life that you want to remember, be it a high school graduation, a marriage proposal, or the birthday of your mom or your father, you're writing it all in light of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And it's amazing that God will make us do this because every time that we take note of any significant event, we are implying that we're doing that in light of what Jesus did on the cross. Wow. And why would God do that? I believe it's exactly what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11:26, that everything that we're doing, we're proclaiming the death of Jesus until his return. Are you with me, church? And that's why we celebrate Easter. That's why we celebrate Resurrection Sunday, because we're proclaiming today and every day Jesus' death on the cross until his return. Obviously, the resurrection of Jesus is an event that some people fail to believe in. But there's enough evidence and eyewitness testimony throughout secular history and even biblical history that will pinpoint the exact time and place where he resurrected. So much so that there's over 400 messianic prophecies in the Old Testament alone that he fulfilled, proving that he actually died and resurrected. Come on, bro. And so the proof for his resurrection is not the scope of our lesson today. You can research it, you can study it on out. But the question that I thought we would consider today is that even though there's so much evidence, both scientific, both historical, to prove the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, why don't we see a greater impact of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection in our world today? Even though this is an event that everybody's celebrating the world over, why does it have little to no impact in the society that we live in today? As I was thinking about this, I was like, well, maybe it's as a result of the bystander effect. Those of you who are familiar with the bystander effect, it's a theory brought forth in social psychology that says that when a group of people witness an event, they are less likely to help, they are less likely to be impacted by it, they are less likely to do anything about it based on the number of other people present. Wow. There's diffused responsibility. Because all of us are living in light of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, maybe it's created a bystander effect in our world today. That because we're all celebrating it, nobody wants to do anything about it. Wow. I'm going to tell you a story. There were 4 people hanging out. They were named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. And there was an important job to be done. But everybody was sure that somebody would do it. This was a job that anybody could do, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry, wondering why this job that anybody could do, nobody would do. Everybody thought anybody can do it, but nobody realized that anybody would do anything about it. And so in the end, everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what everybody could have done. And I believe that's the situation we live in right now. We're all living in view of this incredible flashpoint, central event in human history. But nobody's doing anything about it. And everybody is blaming somebody. Because although anybody could do something about it, nobody is going to do anything about it. Go in Matthew chapter 27. We'll pick it up here in verse 45. It says, from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing there heard this, they said, he's calling out to Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with the wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rock split, and the tombs were open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, surely he was the Son of God. Many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. According to this passage, which is the central passage of what we're celebrating today, the death of Jesus on the cross, there was many witnesses to the death of Jesus on the cross. Not only were there women who had followed him all the way from Nazareth all the way down to Jerusalem, who were there, who saw him die, but also the Roman centurion who was in charge of 100 detachment of men who were overseeing the crucifixion were there as well. Not only that, there were Jewish people, persecutors of Jesus, who desired him to be executed, who were there, who were taunting him. So there was a cross-section of people, potentially hundreds and hundreds of people. And all of them were witness not just to the death of Jesus on the cross, but to all the incredible miracles that occurred when he died. All of these were witnesses of, in quote, the solar eclipse that took place when Jesus died. All of them were witnesses of the curtain in the temple being torn in two. All of them were witnesses and experienced the earthquake that occurred when Jesus died. All of them were there when the tombs of holy people who had died were thrown open, and they resurrected and they went into the holy city. But approximately 40 days after this event, after proof of Jesus' resurrection had been given to everybody, Jesus had but only 120 people that were willing to risk their lives to proclaim his resurrection. Hundreds of people witnessed this event, but only 120 by Acts chapter 1 were found to bear witness to what they had seen and what they had heard. As I was thinking about this, I was like, this is the story of our society today. We're no different from all these people who were alive in the first century that experienced the miracles and saw the death of Jesus on the cross. I know there's some of us who have even said, like, hey, if I was in the first century and I saw Jesus' miracles, I would believe. I would be faithful. I would never doubt. But you betray yourself. Because there was hundreds of people just like you and me who were there that still believed not and did nothing about it. Why? Maybe because of the bystander effect. Or maybe because even though they could see Jesus dying on the cross, there was zero personal responsibility for what Jesus did. That's what makes the difference. If you today can celebrate Resurrection Sunday and take personal responsibility for what Jesus did, then Jesus' sacrifice will make a difference in your life. But if you, like these people gathered there, are observing a spectacle, are celebrating a festival, then it's going to have zero impact in your life. And the world we live in is going to continue to be in darkness because nobody is willing to do what anybody could do something about. And so for today, we're not going to focus on proving that Jesus actually died. We're not going to actually focus on proving that he resurrected. That has already been proved. Today we're going to talk about taking personal responsibility for the day we're celebrating right now. And so the title of our lesson today, Jesus died for me.
Come on. Come on.
Go to Matthew 27.
Come on.
We'll pick up the reading here in verse 15. It says, "Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, 'Which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus was called the Messiah?' For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: 'Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him.' But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. 'Which of the two do you want me to release to you?' asked the governor. 'Barabbas,' they answered. 'What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah?' Pilate asked. They all answered, 'Crucify him.' 'Why? What crime has he committed?' asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, 'Crucify him.' When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instant an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. 'I am innocent of this man's blood,' he said. 'It is your responsibility.' All the people answered, 'His blood is on us and our children.' Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The story of Barabbas is tucked right into the story about Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. And if we are going to understand that Jesus died for us, then Barabbas is a man we need to study out and actually have some connection with. Because as we all know, in a literal way, Jesus died in the place of Barabbas. And so we may all claim and understand that Jesus died for us, but I don't think it's going to have a personal impact in our lives, and I don't think we're going to be able to take personal responsibility for it unless we actually can relate and connect with this man, Barabbas. It says that at that time, when it was time to make the decision of who to crucify, Pilate brings forth Barabbas and Jesus. And he says to the crowd, "Which of the two should I release to you?"
Come on, bro.
They asked that Barabbas be released to them and that Jesus, the innocent man, Jesus, the rabbi, Jesus, the Messiah, Jesus, the anointed one, be crucified for sins and for crimes he had not convicted. And it's like, why would they choose Jesus? Well, Pilate understood it was out of self-interest. They only cared about themselves. They only cared about their reputation. They only cared about their future. They only cared about their life. And that's what prevented them from seeing the incredible crime they were about to commit, sending an innocent man to die. But isn't that the same reason why we don't care too much about Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection? That we're so concerned about ourselves, our own lives, our own future, what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to get out of our own existence. That Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection has not an impact in our lives. What's amazing, obviously, about Barabbas is that he was a criminal that was condemned to die. And so as he was sitting in the dungeon, not only did he understand that he deserved to be executed, not only did he expect to be executed, he knew that that was what justice demanded. And so as he sat in the dungeon that day, awaiting his execution, the warden came to him and said, "Today might be your lucky day. Because today is the day when the governor is going to choose one prisoner to set free." Most likely as Barabbas comes up the steps to come and see Pilate and to see the crowd, maybe there's a glimmer of hope that his life in the dungeon is going to be cut short, not by execution, but by his freedom. But as he turns the corner and he sees that the other prisoner is Jesus, I'm sure his heart sank. I'm sure he saw in the eyes of Jesus an innocent man, the Messiah who had done miracles, who had helped the sick, who had healed the poor. He's like, I deserve to die. Not just for my crimes, not just for what I've done, but because I'm actually being held in comparison to that man. I should die. But as he stands there and he hears the crowds screaming, release Barabbas, release Barabbas, crucify Jesus, crucify Jesus. I'm sure he's confused. I'm sure he's amazed. I'm sure maybe he's wondering, am I dreaming? How possible is it that all these crowds who know what I have done, who are aware of the revolution I attempted to start, but I was unsuccessful in all the murders, would ask for me to be released to them, and Jesus, an innocent man, be crucified? But you know something? I think in that moment he understood something. He's just like you and I. Because every time we choose our sin, we're choosing for Jesus to be crucified. Every time we consciously go into our sin and enjoy our sin, we're choosing Jesus, an innocent man, to be crucified over and over again. So Barabbas can relate with you. The people can relate with you. The question is, do you and I relate with Barabbas?
Come on.
Because when Pilate gives the order for Jesus to be crucified and for Barabbas to go free, I'm sure there's a sense of relief and disbelief. As he walked off the podium that day wondering, wow, is my freedom going to be long-lasting? Is it going to be permanent? Or is this a trick? Every single day, you know what he realized? He was getting a second chance at life. And you know something? He actually believed it. And he actually knew it. Because every single day he woke up in his own bed, in his own home, surrounded by his own family, and not in a dungeon awaiting his death and execution. So he knew it was a second chance. Jesus died so you and I could have a second chance. But can we relate with Barabbas that every day is a second chance? Our first point, a life for a life.
Come on, bro.
Turn with me, if you would, to Psalm 49. Psalm 49. A life for a life.
Preach, bro.
In Psalm 49, verse 7, the Bible reads, "No one can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for them. The ransom for a life is costly. No payment is ever enough so that they should live on forever and not see decay." What does the psalmist tell us here? No one can redeem another life for another. And no one can provide a ransom for a life. Why? Because Ezekiel tells us that the soul that sins is a soul that must die. And so the moment from which you and I sin, we've actually signed our death warrant. We deserve not just to die, but the justice of this planet that we live in demands that you and I should die. Because if we get to go off scot-free, there's no justice. That's why the psalmist says, no one can redeem or ransom the life of another. But isn't that what Jesus attempted to do? Because while I'm alive, I cannot give my life as a ransom for another. It's a life for a life. And so Jesus desired to die in your place, to take your crimes, to take your sins, and to take the responsibility for sin that you wouldn't do. And he died in your place so that justice would be served. It's a life for a life. And when we hear of this sacrifice and we hear about it year after year after year, it is sad that it has zero impact in our lives. because we don't connect with the price that it was paid for you and me. Barabbas knew the price that was paid for him. It was a life. In the same way, anybody who's ever been incarcerated and gets a chance at their freedom will tell you, they're like, wow, the air smells better outside of captivity. Flowers smell even better outside of captivity. Life is sweeter. The voice of my loved ones sounds much better outside of captivity. And that's how Barabbas lived. And God would determine that you and I would live like that every single day. Because every day is a second chance. Because God gave a life for a life. Are you with me, church? Turn me to Isaiah chapter 53.
Come on, bro. Come on.
This is a passage we use to encourage ourselves to take Jesus' death, burial, resurrection personally. In Isaiah 53, we read these words. Verse 4. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray, each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearer was silent, he did not open his mouth. We read this passage, and as everybody knows, this was a prophecy of Isaiah 750 years even before Jesus was born. And it was prophesying that this would be the sacrifice of Jesus, that he would take our place, that God would give a life for our lives. That indeed, even though it's impossible, that God would pay the ransom for your soul and my soul. But it's contingent on us understanding that we, just like sheep, have gone astray. What prevents us from actually connecting with the cross is if we don't believe we've gone astray. That's why Barabbas understood the sacrifice. Because he knew he had sinned. He knew he had sinned against God. That's where it begins. You don't treasure the sacrifice if you don't understand the cost. It was a life for a life. And here we always tell people, when you read this passage, insert your name. That way you can take it personally. That way you can understand that Jesus bore the punishment for your sin. That Jesus was held responsible for all the things that you had done. That Jesus was actually willing to shed his blood for you and me. It's amazing whenever we have communion. I think Grizzle and Edie did a phenomenal job sharing for communion today. And it's always encouraging when you hear somebody share communion or when you and I reflect on our baptism. We all talk about how dark our lives were. And we're so grateful that God was willing to rescue us. And even as we share our own story, everybody can connect with how dark our lives was prior to us coming into contact with Jesus. And that if we look at our lives in retrospect, we're like, it doesn't matter what happens to me today, it's much better than everything that happened prior to this. That's where our gratitude comes from. Because we understand what we've been rescued from. We understand what we've been saved from. God is hoping we have that sense every single day. He's hoping that every single day we understand what it took to purchase your soul and to give you a second chance. So that we don't take it for granted. We always ask this question: what do you think Barabbas did with his life that day after he walked off? And always, there's so many theories because there's no more biblical or historical account to tell us what he did. And so some people have surmised, they're like, well, maybe he didn't do anything significant, bad or good, because if he did, it would have been recorded for us. Some have also surmised, they're like, well, maybe it's actually an opportunity that God is giving you and I to connect and relate with Barabbas. Understanding that his story after he left that day is not written because it's on you and I to write that story. That whatever it is that you and I will do with our lives after coming into contact with Jesus determines the story of Barabbas. Because you and I are Barabbas. So the question has to be asked. Wherever Barabbas may have landed today, if he was to watch your life, what would he say to you? Most people will surmise that Barabbas would say, change. Do something different than what you've ever done before. Because that's the only way that you can show you understand the sacrifice. That's the only way you can show that you're grateful for what Jesus did. And in that moment, when that thought enters our minds, we convict ourselves. Because that's exactly how we ought to live. Are you with me, church? Let's go back to Matthew 27. Our second point. Here in Matthew 27.
Come on, bro.
We'll pick it up here in verse 15. It says again, now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, asked them, which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who's called the Messiah? Anybody who reads the Matthew version basically comes into contact with this significant issue. That both Jesus, who was crucified, and Barabbas, who was set free, actually had the exact same first name. It was Joshua in the Hebrew, or Jesus in the Greek as we know it today. And so on that day, the people had a choice between Jesus Barabbas or Jesus the Christ, the Messiah. But there's more to it than that.
Come on, bro.
The name Barabbas, as anybody who speaks Aramaic knows, is actually Aramaic 2 words. Barabba. Bar means son of, and Abba is what? Father. The people had a choice between Jesus the Messiah or Jesus the Son of the Father. And that's who you and I are. We're sons and daughters of Abba. And Jesus the Messiah had come to redeem the sons and daughters of the Father.
Come on.
But it goes beyond that. Because Abba doesn't just mean father. It means daddy. What's the difference between father and daddy? Father is a biological relationship between an offspring and a parent. Daddy is an emotional relationship between an individual and another individual to whom they love and they look up to.
Come on, Quaco.
God is calling you and I Barabba, sons and daughters of Daddy. He's reclaiming his sons and his daughters who had gone away. Here in chapter 27, verse 50, it says that Barabbas had taken part in an insurrection, in a rebellion. The Luke and Mark account says he was a criminal, he was a bandit. And isn't that true of you and I? The reason we're in the state we're in is because we are taking part in an insurrection, in a rebellion against our God. It's called sin. That we have chosen to live in our sin and to live in darkness in rebellion to our Father. And the only way God had to be able to bring us on back to Him was to sacrifice His Son Jesus, the Messiah. It was the only price that justice would take. It was the only sacrifice that was enough to pay the price. Turn me here to Hebrews. Chapter 2. We're rounding a bend here. In Hebrews chapter 2, We'll pick it up here in verse 14. It says, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it's not angels he helped, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he's able to help those who are being tempted.
Come on, bro.
Hebrews says, because the children of Abba, all the Barabbas in the world, because we were human, we were flesh and blood, Jesus, the Messiah, the Anointed One, had to come and share in our humanity. He had to come and walk the walk and undergo the suffering and the persecution and the temptation that you and I live through every single day, marking for us the path of holiness and righteousness back to God. But he also came to live this life, and he lived it in holiness and in purity, trying to help you and I understand that through his death, he was going to give us power and freedom to actually be able to live the life that our Father in heaven desires of you and me. And so in 1 John 3 verse 1, it says, how great is the love the Father has lavished upon us, that we should be called sons of God, that we should be called Barabbas. That's how much he loved us. That he was willing not just to take our place, but to claim us as his own and to walk in our footsteps and to give us freedom from death and to prove to you and me that we can do it. And so once again, when the original Barabbas walks and looks at our lives today, he's looking at the lives of people that were redeemed just like he was. He's looking at people that were called to become the sons of Father in actuality, just as he was. And you know, but one thing he would hope, that you and I would follow in the footsteps of Jesus, the true Son of the living God. Let's close out in Romans 8.
Come on, Quaker.
In Romans 8, verse 15 says, the spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we're God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. Paul says here in Romans that the spirit we received is not a spirit that confines us to slavery and captivity. No. Jesus actually died so we would be free. Free from the fear of death, free from the power of sin, free from being captive to sin and evil and Satan. But the spirit he gives us is the spirit of sonship. It's the spirit of adoption as the divine sons of a divine God. And so through the Spirit, Paul says, we can cry out to our dad in heaven. We can say, Abba, Father. Just like Jesus cried out on the cross as he was dying for you and for me. And it's like, and why is any of this important? It's exactly what he says here. Now that we're adopted, now that we've been claimed by God, we're not just heirs of God to get the inheritance that God will give us, but we are co-heirs with Jesus himself. Jesus becomes our brother. Our brother took our place. It's more significant than just somebody died in my place. My brother died in my place. And he says, when you come into contact with that, when you connect with that, that now you actually share a father with Jesus,
bro.
then you can do what he did. You can submit yourself to all the sufferings that he was willing to go through. You can submit yourself to all the pain and to everything that this life may rout upon you, knowing that you have an inheritance better than anything this life can give you. That's what makes the difference. That's what changes Easter from just being one more day we celebrate and being a day we remember that the adoption papers were signed in your name. That's what's going to differentiate this Easter, this Resurrection Sunday, from every Resurrection Sunday that you've ever celebrated up till now. Because you're going to remember that not only were you adopted as God's son, but this is the day that he claimed you as his own. And he's hoping that you would cry out to him as your Father in heaven. But more than that, Paul says he's hoping you cry out, Abba. He's hoping you will call him your dad. All those of us who are parents here understand something. It doesn't matter what your kids are doing. But in that moment when they look at you and they say daddy or mommy, it's over. It doesn't matter how much bad they have done. It doesn't matter that they've just taken an ink pen to your white wall. They said daddy. It doesn't matter that for the 387th time today, they have ripped pieces from your Bible. They said daddy. It doesn't matter that they've been disobedient, they've been rebellious, they are not listening, they've been disrespectful. They said daddy. And it changes everything. That's why Jesus died for us. So you and I could experience that.
Come on, bro.
That in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our suffering, we will cry out, Abba, Father. We'll cry out, Daddy. We'll raise our hands to the God who loved us enough that he was willing to pay the ransom, a life for a life. But more than that, he's hoping, just like Paul did, that in our darkest of times, we cry out, Abba, because we can't wait for the day when he walks through that door and we run to embrace him, saying, Daddy is home, and to God be all the glory.